question just to keep on mute because then we won't have any back feed. And actually, first of all, welcome. Thank you for coming, everybody. And so a couple points. And then the other is just for you to know that Dan is recording this and it will be available on our YouTube, Grace University's YouTube channel afterwards. So you can look back if you need to. And also just to let you know that all of the speakers today have resources and we have a document that we'll put in the chat, but we'll also post that on the Grace University so that you can access those along with all of our emails so you can contact us. And one other thing is we've kind of broken this up into two parts and there'll be time for questions. And all of us want you to ask questions so we know that we're telling you what you want to know. So welcome. So we're going to start out with Margaret.
Okay, welcome to our Creation Sunday Climate Change Forum. It's so great to see you folks in this way, and we will see each other in person someday. Those of us that are presenting this forum on climate change are here today because we are the ones who signed up for the Grace University class on climate change offered by Pastor Dan. We're not coming to you as authorities, but like you, concerned citizens and people of faith, wondering what we can do. We hope this forum provides a place to open up more space for questions and discussions as we continue to grapple with our relationship within creation. So climate change is a huge topic. So where do we begin? We decided to focus on sustainable agriculture and sustainable as a beginning point. It is said that eating is an agricultural act. And since eating is our daily, most intimate connection to the earth, the source of all our food, we felt it made sense to start here. So we hope you were able to see the film Kiss the Ground. And one of the reasons it was sort of our starting point with our class. And this film also provides hope in looking at ways to reduce carbon by changing farming practices. The title, I love the title because it speaks to our intimate connection, this love of earth, Kiss the Ground. But this film also presents the complexity of agricultural practices and what needs to change. And what in general, what we need to change is our relationship to the earth and how we get our food. So just to simplify, instead of using the soil as if it's ours to mine, we need to see ourselves in relationship with the soil, that we, along with the soil, are part of creation. And to simplify about agriculture, again, these things are so complex, but industrial ag, if you think of industrial ag, it's been focused and it continues to be more and more focused on production and yield. So you can see how, mining the soil could be part of that. It's like more and more and more production. Regenerative ag, and we're going to use regenerative, sustainable, organic, that focuses on soil health. Gabe Brown, the farmer, the North Dakota farmer that was featured in the film, is really making a difference. Again, if you saw the film, I think it was such a contrast between before and after. If you haven't seen it, I would recommend watching it. But in it, his whole life changed when he, instead of focusing on production with his farm and how many yields to the acre, once he started looking at soil health, the biological community in his pastures came back to life. And it's very, very stunning. Just a hopeful look at the power of these biological communities. And to let you know, other farmers are taking notice, and Gabe Brown is a little bit of a rock star. He's being asked to speak to farmers who are concerned about the depletion of their soils. We actually were able to hear him when he came and spoke to just a small group of farmers here that were concerned and knowing this is where they needed to start focusing. Of course, that was before COVID, so about a year and a half ago. But soil health is becoming more and more of a topic in mainstream ag. The farmers that invited him were not organic farmers. They were conventional farmers looking at better practices. So I hope that you find that very hopeful. I sure do. Gabe Brown, the farmer in the movie, is an example of what is possible. So, but back to us as citizens, people of faith, trying to figure out what we can do, how we all participate in agriculture through what we eat is key. And to speak to some of our personal food choices, Karen Van Norman is next.
Thanks, Margaret. So as Margaret said, we started talking about food choices, and this next slide that Randy's going to pull up shows it's a complex slide, and you'll be like, whoa, what is that all saying? But the main message here is that food is responsible for 26% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So these couple slides that I'm going to share with you are just kind of some foundation information about the role that food plays in climate change. And as you can see with the 26% that's food, then it's enlarged to be a bigger picture. And you can see that the main things that are affecting climate change in relationship to food are livestock and fish farms. And then the green is crops, not just for human food, but also for animal food. And the brown is land use. Once again, not just for human food, but also for livestock. And the blue at the top there is just a small percentage, and it's talking about the supply chain. And I just wanted to reiterate what Margaret said about how it's a complex issue. And so one of my bullets on the slide there says that decarbonizing agriculture will require a menu of solutions, including changes to diet, food waste reduction, improvements in agricultural efficiency, and technologies that make low carbon food alternatives scalable and affordable. So, we're kind of just scratching the surface here. And then in the second slide that I'm showing, that Randy's going to advance for me. Thank you so much, Randy.
And Karen, I just wanted to mention, if each of you can tell kind of where you're coming from, because not everybody knows what your background is.
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah. All right. I'll do that too. I'll do that right now. So I work for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and we have an exhibit at the state fair called the Eco Experience, where we invite state fair visitors to come and learn about ways they can benefit the environment. And we're actually creating a little exhibit right now about the impacts of food related to climate change. So this information that I'm gathering is going to be part of that exhibit here, or that I'm sharing with you. So the second slide shows kind of ranks all these different foods, and I know it's small and it might be hard for you to read, but the one at the top is beef. And down at the bottom are things like vegetables, apples, citrus fruit, nuts. And the reason beef is such a high greenhouse gas emitter is, you can see the green is the land that's needed for raising beef, and the brown is the farm relationships. And I just made the words a little larger in describing the brown category there for beef so that you could see what it says. It's because there's methane production from cows and land conversion for grazing and animal feed means that beef from dedicated beef herds has a very high carbon footprint. It's, it's something that we've heard a lot throughout our lives about eating lower on the food chain, et cetera. And this just, I think, is a really good illustration of the amount of greenhouse gases that are emitted by beef. So what we're trying to say in this is we're not going to be like preaching for everyone to stop eating meat. We know that that is difficult, and I know for myself that I'm not ready to totally make that commitment. But what we're hoping that you might do as a result of this forum is to start thinking about things that you can do. That in the ways that you buy food and the ways that you eat food that can really help address climate change. And we see this forum as an invitation to do that. So for example, one of the things I'm committing to, my husband and I, is we eat very little beef already, but we're going to make sure that when we eat beef, that it's like a special occasion, and that we acknowledge that we're having a big effect here on the climate with that. So that's just a little background information, and I'm going to pass it over right now then to Joan Christensen. Oh, that's a great slide.
Okay. I'm titling can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I've titled mine Our Small Little Dinky Step. I've been a GRACE member since 1978, the year that my husband Jerry and I moved here from California, where I was highly influenced by the times and the air of consciousness raising that I was breathing, including in the Lutheran church I was involved in. Becoming a parent, along with the idea of questioning authority, helped inform the eating choices I was making. Books like Frances Moore Lapé's Diet for a Small Planet and the Mennonite More with Less cookbook found their way to my kitchen cookbook shelves. I was also fortunate to have a mother, a native Californian, who cooked healthy, well-balanced meals containing several vegetables along with meat, which was the centerpiece of the meals, often stretched by various methods in order to feed 7 mouths. When I was learning how to cook, Jerry would often comment about some of my meal experiments, that if he wanted to eat sprouts, he could go out in his university alfalfa fields where he did insect research and eat them there. Well, now I have a more willing compatriot in my husband, as we continually try to eat mostly unprocessed food from known sources. Busy lives have many times proved to be a barrier to these intentions, but I simply know I feel so much better when I include several plants in my diet and less meat in my meals. I resonate with the messages around the challenges of climate change and the earth care responses I see and hear. I have loved being a part of this Grace University climate change class, mostly as a fly on the wall. In the area of food, I admire people who follow vegetarian or vegan diets, whatever their reasons. Like all of us, family budget enters into what we choose to eat. When supermarkets became more like warehouses, rather than the corner grocery store where my mom shopped, we were incentivized to buy in large quantities in order to save money. These stores have to keep getting bigger and purchase from larger and larger farms and ranches, corporations, thus requiring more travel from outside our local regions, all of which we now know contributes to our carbon footprint. There's also the issue of the equity of distribution and access, as is seen in the food deserts that abound in our communities. Energy and packaging and waste and technology are also, and other issues are also part of the story. However, there is a hopeful tale of the development and expansion of food co-ops, CSAs, like Grace's farmers, Dan and Margaret, and farmers markets, and positive messages of walking lightly on the earth that accompany those healthy opportunities and business models. Lots of information has become more available that educates us about the sources of our food, the growing of it and the distribution of it, and how it affects the global and local food systems. I won't go into those details, which can include, for instance, grass-fed beef, regenerative agriculture, no pesticides or antibiotics. Kiss the Dirt movie is a good place to hear about that part of the tale. Anyway, considering my carbon footprint story, my food journey has been a slow and deliberate one. So, fast forward to this past year, one of self and global awareness. I just think the time had come for me to face how turned off I had become with feedlots and the deplorable conditions that surround the animals and the land that is needed and the people working and living with them. So Jerry and I made the small, teeny-weeny, dinky decision to, instead of purchasing meat from a large grocery warehouse, we could buy meat only from our nearby co-op. And that's so far. That they know where the specific meat comes from and how it is fed and treated. I'm familiar with other GRACE members who have shared additional ways to support sustainable meat producers. Anyway, we consider the cost, so we eat less meat, but it is a quality product. We place meat more at the side of the meal rather than at the center, but we are not meatless. This has been our one little change in our own long, slow journey, which makes us feel better both health-wise and ethically to become stewards, or in Dan's word this morning in the sermon, shepherds, not dominion of the earth. Thank you.
Margaret, you're on mute.
Sorry, I knew that would happen. Okay, so thank you, Joan and Karen. So back to how we can participate in agriculture through what we eat. Well, the good news is, as in Joan's story there, we all can. We can participate. We can make a difference. And any time you know where your food comes from, you have made a choice to be more connected to the earth, to kiss the ground, so to speak. Our farm, there's reference to Dan and me and our farm, it was created not by just Dan and me, but specifically by people, by people who wanted to have a deeper relationship with the earth through the food choices they made. And this was in 1988 to 1990, in that era. So it was consumer, people driven, and they wanted to have a deeper relationship with the earth through the food choices they made. So we have what's called a CSA, and it stands for Community Supported Agriculture. And the community of our farm becomes our members who see themselves as part of the larger biological community that is the source of their food. So it's not just a human community, it's a biological community. We grow vegetables, which is one part of the human diet. But since we've been talking about meat, all the food we buy and eat, is directly related to climate change. And our choices can be made to influence sustainable practices. I believe that we all want to make a difference toward better eating for the planet. But what becomes difficult is where to begin and where do we go to make these choices. And as Joan mentioned, with shopping at the co-op, the Seward Co-op, and Karen's information, we've put together a first step for those wanting to buy sustainably raised meat. We have a shopping list of Twin City meat shops where the meat you buy there comes from small local farms with excellent sustainable practices. And these small businesses are also part of this whole connection, are holding up the intimacy of connection to sustainable agriculture. So these are the just a handful, but there are 3 little meat shops that are source their foods directly from local farms. The meat shop, St. Paul Meat Shop, it's actually, oops. The St. Paul Meat Shop is on Grand Avenue. The Franklin store is with the Seward one. Okay, and then Lowry Hill Meats and Clancy's. So those are some places here locally where you can get excellent choices for your meats. Because our individual food choices are always about the environment, both at home and globally, we now have a part of the forum that has a more global view. Randy is next to introduce an amazing project she is involved with in Guatemala.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. And I'm sorry for the mix-up of the addresses.
No, I think people will be able to find them. Just they can Google them too, but it's the meat shop is in St. Paul and then the others are there.
And also it'll be in the resources list correctly. So great. Well, thank you. Let me go to the next. So I'm Randy Edmondson and I'm a member at Grace, but my career has been in science education in middle school and high school, and specifically also environmental education in projects within my community and schools. But how I want to introduce this is John and I, my husband, we were Peace Corps volunteers in Tanzania in 2007 and 2009 as teachers. But I was also trained by a trainer in Peace Corps for biointensive gardening and permaculture. And so I did a lot of gardening with primary schools and specifically women living with HIV/AIDS, to have highly nutritious vegetables more available through improving the soil fertility and small places and close to home. So also in Tanzania, climate change had really changed their ability to grow food and their soil quality, of which is similar problems that are existing in Guatemala. So in 2018, I was invited by Joan Felice to come with her to Guatemala to share the methods I had learned in hopes that it would address some of these same problems in the Guatemalan women's gardening initiatives that Joan was partnering on. Now, Joan is a retired nutrition professor of MCTC, Metropolitan Community Technical College, and member of the St. Michael's Lutheran Church in Roseville. Joan has many years experience in Guatemala through their church's accompaniment partnership with ELOG, which is Iglesia Luterana Agustina de Guatemala, or the Lutheran Church of Guatemala. Also presenting will be Diego Gil, and Diego is the delegation coordinator at ELOG and has a newly developed foundation, Nukok, creating opportunities for village communities to learn new methods of gardening and agriculture to address poor soil conditions, unpredictable rains, and nutritional challenges, especially for women and children. So I'm going to turn this over to Diego.
Good morning, everyone. As Randy was saying, my name is Diego Gil. Thank you very much for the invitation to this forum today. For me, it's an honor to be able to share our story. I am from Guatemala and I am 27 years old. My role at ILAG, Iglesia Luterana Agustina de Guatemala, is coordinator of partnerships between ILAG and churches in the States. And now I'm going to coordinate the new program of sustainable agricultural for 14 communities in the rural area of Guatemala. Next, please. I'm going to share a little bit of the history of my country. Guatemala is a multilingual and pluricultural country. We are 25 different ethnic groups with 22 different languages. Our main language is Spanish. Our agriculture represents 33% of the economical development for Guatemala, and more than 1.6 million people work as farmers. We harvest beans, corn, cardamom, cacao, and coffee, to mention some examples. Next, please, Randy. Adding to it, Guatemala has a more complicated background. We are a country who suffered 36 years of civil war. From 1960 to 1996, when the peace accords were signed, this was a war that separated thousands of families, and a lot of people were persecuted and killed. A lot of people ran away to Mexico and spent a lot of years as refugees. The beginning of the Civil War was a problem between the United Fruit Company and the farmers in the rural area. It started to become problematic because conflict was based in socialism and capitalism, but it was really just a camouflage for personal interest of powerful people who make brothers and sisters from one country fight each other. When the peace accords were signed after 36 years of civil war in 1996, our people who were refugees came back to Guatemala, but not to their original homes. The government gave land to the people, but in very different places in the country, from the original homes and very, very far away from the principal towns. So you can imagine just coming back from refugee and going to a place where is not your home, and also it was jungle, nothing, no houses, not government, just give plastics bags to cover from the rain. So they started from zero. ILAG, Iglesia Luterana Agustina de Guatemala, accompanied leaders who were negotiating the peace accords, providing housing, food, and legal support in the city. Next, please. ILAG was founded in 1990. We focus in spiritual development as a church, social justice, gender justice, and to give opportunities of formal and technical education for everyone who want. We support an elementary school in the city with 100 children. Also, we have a boarding school called Milagro, housed within the ILAG Center in Guatemala City, for young women of the rural areas to receive formal and technical education, and we provide educational scholarships for rural young people. I think Joanne can add a little bit of her personal experience.
Okay, thank you, Diego. Yes, I'm Joan Felice, and I've spent many years teaching nutrition, physiology, and environmental science at Minneapolis Community and Technical College. And it was a wonderful experience because of the huge diversity of students there. And now I am so grateful for the chance to kind of work on practical aspects of the environment and nutrition in Guatemala. It's always been I've loved the people and the culture of Latin America. So we've already had explained that the St. Paul Area Synod has a partnership between several congregations in our synod and ILAG. And we describe the relationship as caminando juntos or walking together in English. The purpose of the relationship is to establish a friendship between churches of Elog and congregations in Minnesota. We visit, worship, and share time together when we are in Guatemala. And during the rest of the year, we pray for and support each other regularly. We do not go with the idea of doing charity work, but rather as providing a friendship where we trust each other, and we know that if there is a need, that the people will let us know what they want. In the countryside where our congregations are, there's a strong Maya heritage, and I found this really interesting. So I'll have Randy change to the next slide. Here, Diego gave you some of the many foods that came from this area, but there are many more, and the ones that are on this list are just ones that are commonly known. There are many more that maybe aren't as commonly known. Now, as I visited there, I realized how much we could learn from the eating habits of the people in Guatemala as we look to reduce our carbon footprint. One of the things that's very interesting is that the diet of the Mayas contained far less meat than is commonly eaten in the United States. The basis of their diet was mainly corn and beans. And those two eaten together, beans and corn, provide a complete protein comparable to meat in its quality. And I'd just like to tell you some of the amazing things that the Mayas figured out. They had a special processing technique for corn called nixtamalization, where dried corn is boiled with calcium hydroxide, which many of you probably know as chemical lime, before it was ground for tortillas, tamales, and other things. This process does several important things. First, it makes the corn more digestible and frees up the vitamin niacin, which is not very available in untreated corn. And let me say that if you buy the tortillas at the grocery store, those are not nixtamalized. There are a few places in the Twin Cities that do produce nixtamalized corn, but generally it's not available in the grocery stores. Second thing that happens with this processing is it destroys mycotoxins. And that means if the corn is molded, mycotoxins may have been produced, those are destroyed. Third, it adds an important source of calcium in the diet, because if you look at the traditional diet from this area of the world, there weren't any animals to give us dairy. So there needed to be a source of calcium, and it actually came from the tortillas that were processed in this way. Their diet was also high in fruits and vegetables, and that provided significant vitamin C, which helped to increase the absorption of iron from plant foods. Iron in plant foods is much harder for people to absorb. And I just want to point out that the diet consumed in Guatemala is similar to that of Nicoya, Costa Rica, which is another Mesoamerican area. And Dan Buettner, in his book Blue Zones, described it as one of the best diets in the world associated with a long life and healthy life. Okay, next slide, please, Randy. So the women in Guatemala, we had a discussion the first year I went. It was 2014 that I went the first time. And in discussing their traditional diet, these women decided that they would like to start doing vegetable gardening again. And so we received a grant from the Trellis Association, and it provided for a graduate student to come and demonstrate basic gardening techniques, because as refugees or people hiding in the jungle, they didn't have a chance to continue their gardening practices. After that demonstration, the first year, the women in Cimiento, which is our partner village, did build a garden, and they had success, they were able to grow enough cilantro to actually sell it to a local merchant and make some money. And this is a big step when you think about it, because there's really no place where a woman can go and get a job if she finds herself suddenly unsupported. So this was providing a ray of hope for those women. They did actually donate their money to the church. However, the second year of the garden, it failed. And a discussion with the woman and inspection of the garden showed that their tropical soil that the garden was in had no organic matter and was very clay-like and most likely had very few soil nutrients. Also, climate change, which they were experiencing, meant that they had a longer dry season, which is really tough when you have to carry water to your garden to water it. And when the rains did come, they were torrential and things could get washed away. So let's continue here. This is now the next year. I realized that Randy had the information we needed. She came and we first presented at a women's retreat where women representatives from all the congregations came. Randy showed how to compost on a massive scale. I'll have you go back, Randy, just so they can see what an exciting time it was for everyone. So if you go back one picture, yeah. So here you see the women as Randy was showing them about composting and making a double dug gardening bed. It was really an exciting time for everyone. And the beds that she produced, and now we can go on to the next one. She did composting, and here you see the people making these gigantic composting piles, because in order to support the big gardens that they needed to have, you have to have a lot of compost. And so they produced the compost. And if you look on the picture on the right, you'll see that there is a part where the soil is kind of reddish in color. This is the soil that has not yet received compost. And if it gets rained on, it turns hard. The plants can't get their roots through it. But on the sides, you see the soil that is dark because it has this nice rich compost in it. And these beds are soft, the soil is aerated, and it can capture and hold far more water than the other beds that aren't treated in this way. Also, the roots can go much deeper. And so what we see is that the plants can be planted close together, and that close planting means that once the plants start to grow, they provide shade and shelter from the sun so less water evaporates, even reducing further the need for bringing extra water during the dry season. The demonstration was well received and caused great excitement from the attendees. We also specifically visited Cimiento. That's where these pictures that you're seeing right now are from. And we repeated the demonstration for our partner congregation. In 2019, Randy and I returned to spend several days in Cimiento, assisting in creating more garden beds, planting a variety of crops, and strategically planting trees in perennial gardens. In 2020, we saw the results of this work in the photo that Diego sent us. Oh, sorry. Yeah, here we go. Here's some more pictures of the women planting the variety of crops. I also did a nutrition demonstration for the women using a Lego set and showing them that you have to have the proper blocks to build a car with Legos. Your body needs the proper building blocks to build muscle and bone that you need. And then the next picture now is a picture showing success. Look at the beautiful carrots and beets that these women grew with their new great garden. And I've been told that it's really quite an accomplishment to be able to get such good root plants from this tropical soil. In 2019, we returned to spend several days in cimiento, helping them plant the gardening beds. And then we also spent several days at the Milagro Girls School in Guatemala City. We worked with them. So here you see us at the school. We worked with them producing compost as well as doing some cooking classes. And I just want to say here, these girls know how to cook. The people we worked with are traditionally really smart people and hard workers. But what we were trying to do was give them some ideas for preserving vegetables and adding vegetables to their diet. And so now I'll let Randy take over from there.
And so just what I wanted to say, in 2020, Joan and I planned to go back to Guatemala to continue working with the gardens, and but the pandemic, of course, prevented it. So in August 2020, Diego, Joan, and I began weekly Zoom classes with the young women at Milagro, 7 students to begin with, and now 13. The classes have focused on understanding nutritional challenges common to Guatemala, such as diabetes, and learning how the water, carbon, and nitrogen cycles work in their environment, and the methods they're using through composting and community gardening to mitigate the desertification of their lands due to climate change and palm oil plantations. The young women watched and reflected on Kiss the Ground in Spanish, as well as a video about climate change in Lake Chad, Africa. It produced a lot of emotions personally for them and connections to the struggles in their own villages. And most critically, I think, is that they're learning how these nutrient cycles make available what they need through the foods that they choose to grow and eat and feed their children. It's these youth leaders in their rural communities for better health and better food to eat and sell for their people. And now, Diego.
Since the pandemic started, we are very concerned about the health and economic development of the rural communities because they don't have the means or resources to overcome the new challenges due to the pandemic, climate change, contamination, poor soil conditions, poor nutrition. For example, one of the challenges right now is the big corporations such as the palm oil plantations. Their agricultural practices are very bad for our national soil. Deforestation, privatization of the water, and lack of knowledge for our people. So we have realized as a church, we have limitations to make a greater impact in all of these dynamics. For that reason, we started a foundation that is called NACHOC. NACHOC means development in Quechua, which is a native language of Guatemala. With this foundation, we will have more freedom to work to climate change issues with institutions whose constitution doesn't allow them to work with churches. Next, please, Randy. As a foundation, we will accompany communities in the rural area of Guatemala, sharing new ways of planting and harvesting with natural fertilizer, that is the compost. As we plan this new initiative, our goals each year are the following, because it's an initiative of 3 years. The first year is going to be the experiment. Work with communities on composting, soil improvement, growing and eating more greens and vegetables through establishing community gardens and experimenting with new methods to try. The second year is going to be the practice makes the masters. So we are going to have each family is going to have a garden per family in each community. And the third year, we hope that growing more than corn and beans in the agricultural fields, do crop rotation and other sustainable agricultural methods to try in the fields. We will be working together with our villages leaders, for example, Santos. Santos is an environmental engineer student, and with Julio and Raul that are regional coordinators. So the main goal is to improve knowledge and facilitate information for the families in these communities. We want to have a better nutrition and a better income. So thank you very much for your attention.
So now is the time for questions. If people have questions. And remember, just unmute.
There was a question in the chat about, will the food meat source list be emailed to us? Are we going to email all these resources to people, or will it just be on the Facebook page?
Oh, good question, Karen. So my plan in talking with Dan would be that it'll be email. If we have your email, we'll email it to you.
Oh, good.
And so if anybody's on here that hasn't been contacted by Grace, one of us, but we'll send it to email. Okay, Karen, thanks for checking the chat. I'm not sure with my screen share that I can. So,
And
oh, Marianne, go.
yes, I have a question. I realize it's not part of the community economy, but what about coffee from Guatemala? I believe that some of the peace coffee that we see all over now comes from Guatemala. And I also remember, and I miss it, is Guatemala fabric. There used to be stores around the Twin Cities, and I have inquired about it at the consulate, but it doesn't seem to be imported anymore. So, Randy, do you know anything about that? We could help Guatemalan economy in a larger sense.
I maybe want to speak.
Can I respond?
Yes, please.
Good morning, Marian. Yeah, for many years, we are having a really close relationship with churches in the Twin Cities in St. Paul area synod. Thank you very much for the mentioned coffee. We are in Guatemala, we are very good producing coffee, the roasting and the high altitude. Right now we are working with coffee producing, and we hope that we can send coffee to the United States to also support the families and support the foundation in that way. About the fabrics, right now, as pandemic is very difficult to import and export, all the processes are taking longer time than not usually. And also we have the challenge that those quills, the different fabrics are producing by other countries as machines. So it's kind of like imitation. So it's cheaper and quickly. So we are having that challenge right now in our country, that our fabrics and our different textiles are made by hand. So we take longer, and it's not so cheap. No, it's not cheap. It's a big labor. So I think I hope respond to your questions clearly.
Thank you. Joan, is the gala providing some of these things?
Yes, the St. Paul Area Synod is having a gala, and there are references to it in the resources. We are not at this point selling directly the textiles, but if you let me know that there's an interest, we do have some textiles that are left from other galas that I'd be happy to show to you and let you purchase them if you wanted to. The gala that we're having is to support the education in ELOG for the girls, for the school that is located in the poorest section of Guatemala City, so that the children have a place to go during the day that's safe. And then also for education of the the leaders in the rural areas so that we have a good communication there. Is that helpful at all? You can contact me if you want to have a look at some of the textiles that we have.
And the gala is next weekend, is that true?
Yep, the gala is next weekend. Boy, I'm forgetting the time right now, but the information is on the St. Paul Area Synod website. It's also under ELOG in Facebook. And there will also be a video recording of the gala, so you can tune in and see that for a week or so after the gala.
Thank you. And I have all those links on the resources that will be emailed to you, as well as Joan's email.
Okay.
I have a question for Karen.
Mhm.
Karen Van Norman.
Yep.
You know, that horrendous impact of beef on that chart you showed. So if we were to buy locally sourced beef from a co-op, is the carbon footprint a lot better, or is it still pretty high? I mean, how much of an improvement is there?
And that's where it gets complex, but it is still really high, and it's because beef they're ruminators and they produce methane. But I don't know if Randy, could you go back to the very first slide that I had up of the, yeah. So in reading about this, and it was surprising to me, one more, yep. It was surprising to me that, so you see the blue part of this slide, that is the supply chain. And so it's transport is only 6% of food emissions. And if you want to, our World in Data / environmental impacts of food is really a good article that talks that kind of the person is basically interpreting the research that these two people, Poor and Nemesek, have done, and basically says very clearly that the beef could be transported to you from around the world, and it still is going to have a high carbon footprint because it's beef. And but I always want to say but, because we also do know, though, that there are really good advantages to buying local meat, such as what what Margaret mentioned and what Joan mentioned, is that we know, that local grass-fed beef that's raised on a small farm or whatever, there's not the feedlots, there's not the water pollution, there's not the huge amount of use of perhaps antibiotics. They're not being fed grain that is being grown on conventionally tilled agriculture, so on and so forth. So, yeah. And someone else asked something about, does beef include all meats? And no, it doesn't. Cattle meat is beef. But also, I believe sheep are also ruminators, and so they also produce methane. So sheep are also have a higher carbon footprint.
Your chart shows lamb is a little bit less, and
yeah,
then pork and chicken were the best as far as the meat categories.
Right. Yeah. So you can see lamb is right underneath beef because it also is a ruminator. And then further down are poultry and eggs. And the sad thing is look at how high chocolate is. I'm not quite ready to give up chocolate.
right. Oh, I think it mute man. So unless there's other questions, we can go forward. Our next is Olivia Olson.
Hi, everyone. I'm Olivia. I am a senior at the University of Minnesota, and I'm studying both food systems and global studies. And so I am here today to talk to you guys on a little bit more of a global scale in terms of some things with agriculture, starting with a bit of a broader picture of industrial agriculture than Kiss the Ground provided. And so to get started with that, as if most of you watched this presentation or the documentary, you'll remember that they focused a lot on the soil. And like they said, perhaps for those of you who didn't get a chance to watch it, typical monoculture farming, which is what we have in the United States in a lot of places where it's just corn or soybean or hay, it's just one crop for acres and acres. So it leaves the soil bare for most of the year, which results in a lot of water runoff and soil erosion because we have in the Midwest especially such a short growing season. So once you harvest your crop, then the soil sits bare until you plant crop next year. And so it's been estimated that about a quarter to a third of the topsoil in the Midwest has been eroded as one of the most recent estimates. And so topsoil, which is sort of self-explanatory, but it's the top layer of soil. So it contains the most organic matter, lots of nutrients and microbes, and it's needed for growing about 95% of the world's crops. So this is really important stuff. And globally as well, about 25 to 30% of the world's soil has been degraded, and just soil overall. So this includes more than just the topsoil. And this has really huge detrimental impacts for the state of global farming and food security because people need to be able to produce food for themselves. And in terms of soil erosion, the United States is losing soil about 10 times faster than it's being replenished. Soil takes years, decades, and even centuries to truly replenish itself and build up this layer of topsoil with nice organic matter that we had in the Midwest with all of the natural plains and grasses that for hundreds and thousands of years had just built this incredible soil that has made our farming so good for so many years. But we're losing it 10 times faster than it's being replenished. Additionally, industrial farming also focuses on treating the land and its resources as basically a crop factory. So it's not, they don't focus on it as a whole ecosystem. You just focus on trying to get as much yield out of your crop as you can. And so there's a huge lack of biodiversity. There's, of course, soil detriment, like the soil health is severely affected, as the documentary talks about. You don't have the sort of natural resilience because I forgot the farmer's name, I'm sorry, but one farmer who lives in North Dakota that Margaret mentioned earlier, he said his crop was destroyed for 4 years in a row, and he didn't have any crop income for 4 years in a row. He just had the one crop that, you know, it was destroyed by hail, but he also, like, he now has all of this, this flexibility and this resilience built into his farm since he has so many crops. He said he doesn't have to worry so much about just the price of corn or soybeans is, since he has vegetables and livestock and cover crops and all this type of stuff. There's also a big impact on water in a couple of different ways with industrial agriculture. One of which, as mentioned earlier too, is just the heavy reliance on pesticides and herbicides, fungicides, all these different chemicals. They increase pest resistance, and so you have some of these plants that just are immune to like Roundup at this point because they've been sprayed with it so many times, and so they say you have to keep spraying more and more, and then with your degraded soil quality, this water with the pesticides and other chemicals runs off into rivers, streams, lakes, all these waterways, and then contaminates drinking water. It contaminates all sorts of natural ecosystems. One of the biggest examples, which many of you may have heard of, is the dead zone in the Mississippi Delta, where the Mississippi River empties out into the ocean, basically. it's this big area where it can't really support life anymore, and which is hugely due to a lot of the chemical runoff from farms in the Midwest that goes into the Mississippi, travels all the way down. There's also a world water crisis. There's a lot of shortage of fresh water in many countries around the world, and that includes the United States as well. New Mexico and California have been experiencing pretty severe droughts for years. And California is the largest exporter and producer of dairy, produce, and nuts in the United States. It has a great climate for ag. It's kind of this Mediterranean climate that you would find over in Southern Europe. And so you've got great seasons and you have just like perfect weather, nice soils for growing all of these crops. However, there's a severe lack of water. And so that poses a big issue for, residents who have to fight the farmers in a sense to try and figure out like where they're going to get water from and how can everybody living in the state get enough water that's clean and fresh, as well as all the farmers get enough water for all their crops to be grown. And then lastly with this, there's a lot of deforestation that has happened over the years, unfortunately, as well, due to the expansion of industrial agriculture around the world. There's around 50,000 acres of forests that are destroyed each day to increase the industrial farming of crops and cattle worldwide. A lot of this you may have heard about. There's a lot of talk about the Amazon and how the Amazon has been destroyed in order to grow like palm oils and soybeans and things, or cattle ranching. Many of these crops like soybeans will go to feed the animals being grown on their ranches as well. And so that completely eliminates the environmental benefits brought by this biodiversity of the forest and all of the animals and microbes and plants that live in it. And just the ability of these forests to act as a carbon sink and take in this carbon from the atmosphere. There's also investors from wealthy countries like the United States that are going into other smaller nations like Ethiopia, other countries in Africa, Latin America in particular, to buy up land that is owned by subsistence farmers. So people who've been living on their land, growing food for themselves. And so the investors will buy up this land and then have the people become very reliant on these foreign companies. And they're now growing monoculture crops like sugarcane, so that it can be transported out of the country to be processed elsewhere. A lot of the profit, again, does not go into the local communities, and it's sent to these larger investors so they can continue to get wealthy. And then, of course, there's the added degradation of not just the society and culture for so many places, as well as the environmental destruction that this causes. You could go to the next slide, please. So the next thing I want to mention is food waste. This is also touched on briefly in the documentary, but this is also a global issue. In the United States alone, 30 to 40% of the food grown each year is wasted. And so this is about 80 billion pounds, which is around 1,000 Empire State Buildings. So this is just an incredibly vast amount. And this waste comes from many places. It comes from grocery stores, school cafeterias, restaurants, other areas in the food industry, individual households, and those are just some of the main contributors to food waste. And so at an individual household level, we can conceptualize this as about $1,600 that your family would spend that's wasted each year on food that you might purchase and never eat. And so that's average for the country. So it might be a little different for you personally, but that's average for the country. And so if globally then, if food waste was a nation, if you gathered up all of the food waste in the world and compiled it, put it together in one space, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases behind China and the United States. So food waste is a large producer of methane as it sits and decomposes in landfills, typically in our plastic trash bags that we put in there. So it gets really hot, it heats up and produces a lot of methane. And so methane is a greenhouse gas, which is 25 times as potent as carbon is. So even though there's less of it in the atmosphere, it's in a sense almost worse than carbon because it can hold so much, it has a capacity to hold so much more heat. And so then aside from being the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases, this massive landscape that is food waste is 5.4 million square miles. And so it's the second largest country in the world after Russia. And so Russia's massive, and then food waste comes right after that. And then about 33% on a global scale of all food grown is wasted around the world. Some of this is considered food loss. So this happens before processing, when if the farmers can't harvest, they don't have enough labor to harvest all the food and it rots in their fields. If they don't have adequate transportation to get it, like a refrigerated truck, so they can transport it safely from one place or another. They don't have enough roads to transport the food from one place to another and gets lost along the way. As then it also this percentage also includes food waste, which happens during processing, distribution, and consumption. And of course, meat has a larger impact than plants do, because there's more resources, more water, more feed, more crops that go into feeding the animals and caring for them, raising them. Then there's more of that input that's needed than there is to just grow like bok choy or carrots or bananas. So plants that would go directly to you. And then, so at an individual level, we often throw food out in our own houses because maybe you didn't want to eat your leftovers, or food sits in the back of your fridge and forgets about it. This happens in my apartment. My roommate's good at this. And so it sits in the back of the fridge, you forget about it, becomes old and moldy. There's also a lot of confusion over the best by, sell by, use by labels on packaging. Those are not very clear and often should be taken with a grain of salt. And so people will see that they think their food's expired and then throw it out, but it's still perfectly good to eat. And so a couple of quick recommendations that we have for reducing your own personal food waste would be to only purchase food that you know you're going to eat. So plan out what your meals are before you go to the grocery store, so you don't buy a lot of extra things thinking you'll eat it, but then you never do. Be sure to put your new foods that you buy in the back of the fridge and put the older ones in front, so you know to use up, this head of broccoli that you bought half a week ago before you use the newer broccoli that you just purchased. And then if you have the option, buy blemished produce. It's still perfectly good. Maybe you need to cut out a spot, but it's still great to eat. And oftentimes food is thrown out because it doesn't look perfect. So if you can use your voice to advocate at a policy level, if there's anything at your community level or the state or national level, even if you come across anything, you can use your voice also as a citizen to say, hey, this is something I really care about, and we need to find better ways to reduce food waste. Next slide, please, Randy. And then the last thing I want to mention, just briefly today, we don't have time to cover this as in-depth as it truly deserves, but we just want to take a moment and acknowledge the power structures and discrepancies and inequities within the global agriculture system as we know it, and what we're most familiar with, which the way the United States agriculture system operates. So this system is built upon the exploitation of land, both here in the US as well as in other nations, kind of as you can see in this comic that's on the background of the screen of this slide. So it's showing how the United States and Europe have basically extracted all of these resources and all of this wealth from the countries in the global south, and then taken it and made it their own. So this system has, like I said, been built on exploitation of land resources and the labor and knowledge of people of color. And so this still has huge impacts on current power structures and the socioeconomic standings of nations all over the world. It would make for a great forum conversation if anyone's interested in that, but we just want to take a quick moment and talk about it today without going too in depth. But just some brief history. So former colonial powers like the United States and many nations in Europe like Germany and Portugal, Spain, Belgium, Britain, they colonized nations with the intent of building up their own wealth and their own standing in the global market. So they used the forced labor of Black people, African people, Indigenous folks, and other communities of color all over the world, typically in what's known as the global south, in order to harvest their natural resources in these countries, like chocolate and coffee, rubber, sugar cane, which then would be shipped as raw materials to the United States and Europe for processing, and then they could sell it from there and earn a higher profit, which allows them to build up their wealth and power while continuing to exploit labor and natural resources and really not pay these workers or not pay them much at all. And so even though we're in post-colonial times today and all these countries have gained independence, these systems still exist. They haven't been demolished. And so there's a continuation of racism and all this national discrepancy in agricultural practices and policies. There's so many, if you've ever wondered, like, why are some of these nations in the global South poor compared to the United States, for example, they're still working within this framework of exporting raw materials, just a couple of raw commodities, without having been able to diversify and really have the flexibility to grow their own food, to build their own economies and lives, because there's been so much influence and pressure from places like the United States and Europe, trying to keep these systems in place which benefit us who are living in the US and as mostly white people. And so there's just this heavy reliance on imported goods and a lot of heavily subsidized grain crops from places like the United States, since we have such heavily subsidized things like corn and soybeans, which are often sent overseas as well. And so briefly with Kiss the Ground, it does a really great job at explaining the potential of the world's soils and just the huge need to build those up and make those a lot higher quality, build up the organic matter and really take the time to care for those. That is such an important thing. I don't want to downplay that in the slightest, but the film itself has received some fairly substantial critiques from individuals of color, who I'll refer to as BIPOC. For those of you who aren't familiar with the term, it's BIPOC and stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. And so this film focuses a lot on white leaders, farmers, funders, and celebrities too, basically they're just ignoring the contributions of BIPOC individuals to the regenerative agriculture movement. And there's pretty much just white people talking throughout the entire film. And the majority of regenerative agricultural practices throughout history have their roots in Indigenous and African farming practices, but the movement has been taken over by white folks. But when they talked like with Tom Brady or Jason Mraz, who left music to go start an avocado farm. So the film also fails to take a broader view of climate change and agriculture, and to look beyond just soil health and address some of these serious social inequalities and structural racism that's found within agriculture, both in the US and around the world, as I've mentioned, such as the forcing of Indigenous and Black people off of their lands and discrimination at all levels, including a lot of embedded racism in the USDA that makes it difficult for farmers of color to access farmland or to get loans, to get assistance for anything like that to really get going. So their contribution has been majorly downplayed and they're really not shown or supported in this film at all. But as we continue to learn more about climate change and agriculture, it's really important to keep these structural inequalities and racism at the heart of the discussion so that we can make changes that improve environmental sustainability along with social justice and environmental justice and equity along with all of this. So I just wanted to bring that all to light today. And if anyone has any questions at any point, you can definitely ask. But I just wanted to share that with all of you and share a little bit more of a nuanced and deeper view of what's going on a global level with agriculture.
Thank you, Olivia. That was great. Good afternoon. I am Steve Solbrech, a member of GRACE for over 20 years. And thank you for joining us today. And thank you to Pastor Dan for convening the GRACE Climate Change Group last fall. And thank you to Randy for taking the lead with this forum. Next slide. Many of you likely have some familiarity with the Nature Conservancy. It is a leading conservation organization in the United States and around the world. They work with public and private partners to ensure our lands and waters are protected for future generations. And their mission is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. In the United States, the Nature Conservancy is organized through semi-independent state or multi-state chapters and I am the co-chair of the Nature Conservancy Global Advisory Council for Minnesota and the Dakotas. And the council is made up of current and former trustees and other community leaders. Next slide. In Minnesota and the Dakotas, our current priorities are protect our waters, forests, and grasslands, build sustainable food and water systems, and tackle climate change. Sustainable agriculture is a key component of building sustainable food and water systems. And as we know, water quality and sustainable agriculture are quite interdependent and interrelated. We know that our current industrial agriculture practices are greatly degrading the water quality of our lakes, rivers, wetlands, and aquifers. It's imperative we make major changes to our agriculture practices. Next slide. Few things shape our planet on the scale that food does. Food production has altered our planet more than any other human activity. It accounts for 24% of greenhouse emissions, 70% of all fresh water usage, and is perhaps the single greatest cause of biodiversity loss. Food production is also the cause of 80% of global habitat loss, a trend that is accelerating. And yet the vast scale of our food system means it can be one of the greatest opportunities for positive change to the planet. We're at a pivotal moment in history. There has never been a better or a more crucial moment to make changes across the food producing sectors. Food production is not only the biggest force affecting nature, it also accounts for nearly 10% of the global economy. So if we want greener, fairer economies, a primary target should be to transform our food economy to sustain nature, while also feeding more people and better supporting the livelihoods of farmers, fishers, and other producers. Sound like an impossible task? It's entirely possible. In fact, the seeds of the transformation have already been sown. It's the shift to regenerative food systems. Next slide. Regenerative food systems use production techniques that not only avoid degrading nature, but work to actively restore it, while also maintaining or increasing food production. I would like to share an excerpt from a Nature Conservancy article titled "Beyond Sustainable, a Food System to Restore the Planet." Regenerative soil practices offer one clear example. Row cropping techniques such as reduced or no-tillage planting and the use of cover crops can restore the complex soil biology that is key to long-term crop production, while also capturing more greenhouse gas emissions and reducing nutrient runoff, more food, and a healthier environment. But soil health is just one example. Regenerative food systems can also include improved grazing, restorative aquaculture, and better fisheries management. Accelerating the adoption of regenerative production practices within the global food economy could be the most cost-effective opportunity we have to restore nature. At the Nature Conservancy, we're inspired by the pragmatic potential of this opportunity. A regenerative food system is our best option, not just to protect nature, but to ensure human life survives and thrives. Together, we can turn today's biggest threat to nature into its greatest opportunity, a food system that creates positive growth for communities, economies, and the planet. Next slide. Yeah, and are you looking for a few easy ways to make your community a little greener, but don't know where to start? Do you find yourself unsure about what can actually be recycled or don't know what to do with food scraps? I would encourage you to take a look at the Everyday Sustainability Guide from the Nature Conservancy. It has 7 good for our planet steps that are easy to take. They're easy, science-backed tips for how you can make the biggest impact for our environment right from your own home. Next slide. And 4 of the 7 ideas are directly related to today's forum topic. Leave that all or nothing mindset behind, reduce your food waste, eat more plant-based foods, and when in doubt, leave it out. So I will put the link in the chat, and Randy will include the link in her follow-up email. And next slide. And then we've given some thought and had some discussions around future forums around climate change. And one of my priorities in retirement has been engaging young adults in leadership opportunities. At a future forum, we could discuss opportunities for young adults to receive leadership development opportunities while working on climate change. I'm the founder of the Twin Cities Rotary Eco Club and the new Rotary Club chartered in February of 2019 with 44% of members under age 40, an overall club average age of 42. And this is within a global service organization that has less than 6% young adults and an average age of 68. This past month, I led a small team that chartered the new Rotaract E-Club for the environment for young adults ages 18 to 30. And we're chartering with 20 members from 10 countries around the world. And their primary focus will be addressing climate change. And we have Grace member Claire Brady, who's the founder and executive director of Our Climate Voices. Claire has engaged a team of young adults to augment climate stories to spark climate action. And so these are just a few examples of something we could do in a future forum to engage and have a discussion around engaging young adults with climate change. So thank you for the opportunity to present to you today, and I'll turn it back over to Randy.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for everyone. This comes to the end of our presentations, and we wanted to have this time again for any immediate questions that people have that they want to address to the speakers. And we'll do a short reflection and close. So questions, any immediate questions that people have?
Randy, oh, go.
Sorry, go ahead. You can go.
Yeah. So Jan, yeah. So if you want to ask the question you have in the chat, go ahead.
Yeah, I just threw it up in the chat, but I'm wondering, Steve, in your experience, how does the Nature Conservancy work with Indigenous peoples of the Dakotas and Minnesota?
Yeah, so on a global scale, they have two co-directors of relationships with Indigenous peoples. And I'm mostly familiar with their work in Brazil and engaging with Indigenous peoples and in Alberta and on the West Coast in British Columbia. So that's where they've been doing the bigger work with Indigenous peoples. And I know there is some in South Dakota. And Indigenous peoples have a really key role in addressing climate change because they are very involved with some of the remaining forests, the Amazonian forest in South America and the boreal forest in Canada. And so there is a high level of focus on that. But I don't have any specifics for your answers. So.
Thank you.
And thanks, Steve, and others, because I can't see my chat, so.
Yeah, so Randy, so Dan Garner's just pointed out, you are all invited to join with this team at advocacy, education, and action in regard to eco-justice, climate change, and the racial equity concerns in agriculture and food production.
I just wanted to add something. In addition to everything else we've talked about, there's also the consideration of the humane treatment of animals, which goes along with the idea of, for example, grass-fed beef and, chickens that are not cooped up, etc.
Thank you, Karen.
I have a comment.
Thank you, Marianne.
Karen Van Norman, I think that's when you talk about personal eating habits and consumer habits. One thing I didn't see addressed was the issue of packaging and to avoid plastic packaging as much as possible. So that's what I like to see included in this thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Maybe you want to speak?
I know, Olivia, you had done some research on packaging. I'll just say, I mean, there is some packaging that actually helps to preserve food, so there's less wasted food. But you're right. I mean, we have a tendency to overpack everything, and yeah, there's greenhouse gas emissions from that also. It's still a lower percentage than in food production than, you know, the amount of emissions for using of the land, converting the land to conventional crops, etc.
Yeah, packaging for food doesn't have as much of a climate change impact as it does on just a global waste sort of impact instead, because only a lot of food is wrapped in plastic in some capacity, whether it's, you know, a bag for your chips or it's the plastic container that you buy some pre-cut vegetables in or anything in between. And about 9% of plastic globally, just 9% gets recycled. So all of this other plastic goes somewhere. And so plastic will take decades, centuries, even 1,000 years, depending on the kind, to break down. And so it'll sit and go into waterways. There's a Great Pacific Garbage Patch. If any of you have heard of that, it's this massive patch of a lot of plastics as well as just random garbage floating around in the Pacific. And it's a massive waste problem. The US and some other nations have for years been shipping just boatloads of plastic waste and other waste over to countries in like Eastern Asia, Southeastern Asia, who don't really have the infrastructure to deal with it, nor is it okay for us to be doing that in the first place. We need to tackle our own waste. But bottom line, if you can get food without packaging, that's great. If you can do something like use reusable grocery bags. Either there's, you know, the larger bags to hold all of your groceries, or reusable produce bags so that you don't get like so many little plastic bags for your groceries or your produce every single time you buy like a couple apples or asparagus or whatever it is. So it's something to be conscientious about. And if there's, you know, again, any policies, any sort of thing you can be outspoken about in your communities, talk with your family or friends, neighbors, let them know as well. It's something that we need to work on, but is also at a larger company level, the people producing all the plastic, the people who package things in plastic. So it's a little bit of individual, but also just a really large societal kind of corporate thing that has to be tackled too.
And I have to say that when the students at Milagro watched Kiss the Ground and they wrote their reflections, one thing that came up amongst the girls was the amount of plastic waste and waste in the rivers. And maybe Diego, you want to speak about that more directly in Guatemala?
Well, about the waste in the rivers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right now, as I mentioned before, with the palm oil plantation, we are having a big struggle in Petén, that is the north area of Guatemala. We are having a big company planting a lot of palm to produce oil, and it's very, very bad for our soil, and a lot of families are trying to survive, but they are selling their land to that company, and they are every year expanding. And you know that palm oil, it's one of the main sources of taking all the hydro resources from the soil. So that's one struggle. And also we have many hydroelectricals who are privatizing the rivers, trying to steal the water, and companies who are also producing different, how do you say that, Randy? Producing different, I forgot the word in English.
Maybe John.
Yeah, maybe John can help me there. And yeah.
¿Qué es en español? ¿Qué es la
En español son las grandes compañías que están produciendo diferentes pues, productos o bienes. Entonces, hay muchas fábricas que están contaminando las fuentes hídricas de los ríos y los mares porque hay mucha polución en las fuentes hídricas.
Yeah, and so the companies want to steal the water in order to build more factories and get more industrialization going on, rather than worrying about the production of the agricultural lands. Is that a fair translation, Diego?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Josh.
Randy and Joan, this is Margaret. In your experience in Guatemala and other countries, how often did you see insects incorporated in the diets of the native people?
You know, I don't see that very much in Guatemala. I don't know traditionally. I know that a lot of areas of Mexico have a lot of insects that they incorporate, but I have not seen it in Guatemala. Diego, do you know?
No, in our country, we are not used to eat insects. We eat a lot of corn and grains and beans. So the consumption of meat is pretty low. And what we are facing today, a lot of people is buying too many canned food, and what is odd is that our way to eat is changing a lot. It's because it's faster, and I think it's cheaper sometimes to buy a jug of soda than just a jug of water. So families in the rural area are changing the way how they consume water. You can see in the morning, years before, the men working in the fields drinking an atole that is made by corn or tortillas. Now they are in the morning 6 a.m. drinking a 3 liters jug of soda and different energy drinks, because the tiendas, the little stores in nearby the communities are selling very cheap, and we are worried about the effect in the future to their health.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that we see is the cheap industrial food now is really what's affecting the health of everyone. The soda is causing massive tooth decay. All of the junk foods are related to the increase in diabetes, which was just about unknown before they became available. It's really a disservice to the people to make those. And that's one of the things that we're working on in teaching our classes, is to find some ways that the girls, maybe when they go back to their villages, can produce some healthy foods and encourage easy foods that are healthy. They had that in the past, but of course, attitudes, because of the Western influence, have made some changes.
I'll just say one last thing is, in Tanzania, insects were common to eat.
I didn't understand. They were what to eat?
When I worked in Tanzania in 2007, 2009, people ate insects and would gather insects to eat. Along with the chickens would eat all the insects. So the insects were more common in Tanzania.
Ah, okay. I've done some research on it, and there's many countries where insects are considered an important source of protein, not just a novelty. And so and I know from Mexico, as you referred, Joan, but I was just curious about some of the other countries in Central America.
And Margaret, maybe you can tell your background. Some of the people won't know.
Oh, well, my background really isn't in eating insects, but I'm an entomologist and a beekeeper, and I've been very concerned about all the things you've been talking about in this most excellent presentation. And so I've presented a couple of classes on edible insects as a part of the normal diet in a lot of different countries, hoping to convince people here. And there are places in Minnesota right now, there are places where you can buy products made from crickets, for example. Just trying to change, I guess, the mindset that so many people have about insects, and that certainly some of them are a nuisance or a pest, but we could also consider using them for protein. So I'm learning about that. I have some wonderful recipe books and I'm experimenting with things, but I'm against trying to buy these things coming from other countries. And so I'm at the moment actually working with a couple that live in St. Louis Park who have a company called the Three Cricketeers. They raise their own crickets. They're licensed by the Minnesota Department of Health and the Department of Agriculture. And they're now selling some products that people can learn to use in cooking or in cooking, basically. So anyway, thanks.
Thank you.
Well, I'm aware of our time. If there's any important question, I think maybe we could move to reflections. Also just to say, as you write in your reflections, and I know Steve is going to help us with this, the idea that amongst our group, we talked about other things that would be important to have the forum about and just limited it here. So we're interested in something that you want to know more about, that there might be future forums on that we weren't able to touch on today. And as you heard from Olivia and Steve and others, that they already suggested some opportunities that they're thinking about for the future. So now this is your time. And Steve, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, with my Twin Cities Rotary Eco Club, what we talk about is education to action. Spent a lot of time in webinars and presentations, and a lot of times the meeting ends at the end of the presentation and providing information. And we're out of time here, but let's just take a moment and ask if you would just reflect for a moment and think about the forum, and was there something you learned, something new, something you didn't know about that you thought was important? Do you have any ideas of something you can do? Either thinking about what you learned at the forum or taking a look at the information that the resources that Randy is going to email out. Is there something that you might do differently in the next few weeks, the next few months, the next year? Action that you could take to help the environment and help solve climate change? And as Randy mentioned, is there something you would want to know more about? Any ideas that you have for future forums that you would be interested in learning more? And if anybody has any thoughts now that you want to put in the chat on any of those three questions, feel free to do so, especially the third one about something you want to know more about. So thank you so much to everybody for being here today.
Dan is our tech person. As Steve's as people write and their reflections, and Steve, I think you're gonna share out some of them. I'm assuming in the recording, we'll have a record of the chat.
Yeah, yes.
And
Yeah.
so if you think we might not have your email, put it in the chat. We'll make sure we get that to you.
Yep. And many people have done that. Some people have had to leave already. But people have written comments in the chat, and have also, those who want to make sure we have their email have done that already as well.
And Margaret, were you going to close out the meeting? Or are you going to finish up?
Do we want to read anything or not, Steve? That's in the chat.
I think we're about out of time, so it might be best just to share it out in your follow-up communication.
Okay, that sounds great. And then Margaret, yeah, I'll let you close.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks everybody for being part of this. It's amazing from all the chats, all the questions, that there really is a lot of good energy around here. And like I said, I think we are all people wanting to have solutions and work on solutions. We're willing to identify problems and move from there. So we welcome, as this goes forward, welcome ways that we can continue in this communication. So thank you all for being here.
And I just want to add verbally a thank you to Diego for joining us from Guatemala today, to Joan, for Olivia from the University of Minnesota, and then the GRACE members who were part of the class who did a lot of work presenting this forum. So thank you all so much.
Thank you everyone, and I felt very welcome, and thank you for your attention and the invitation. Take care.
Thank you, Diego. It was a wonderful presentation, Diego.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to say thank you too for including me very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.